some might say, here we go again. Last week, we had a group of influential journalists blasted for arguing for the appropriation of other cultures. This week, it's a white senator using racial slur during a Senate hearing. Independent Senator André Pratte was arguing for the passage of Bill C-16. That's an anti-gender discrimination bill, and he was trying to make a point about free speech and genderless pronouns. Here's that clip.
And laws protect people against discriminatory language or hateful language. Some people may think that blacks should not be referred by their name, that they should all be called hey nigger, but you don't call them hey nigger, you call them by their name because this is things that you do. So this same kind of things would apply to transgender people. You don't call them by a name that they don't think they should be called them. You call them by the name that they choose and that by the pronoun that they choose, because this is the respectful thing to do.
Pratte did offer an apology later in an email to CBC News, but one could argue that it falls into the category of non-apology apology. Take a listen, or take a read. CBC News, Pratte writes, I was saying that was the kind of language that should be forbidden, like misgendering. So, of course, if even in that context it offended someone, I apologize unreservedly. Should the Liberal-appointed senator get a pass because his slur was well-intentioned? Or did he highlight the cultural insensitivity and what some call ignorance of an overwhelmingly white Senate? We're back with the Sunday Scrum. Susan Riley, John Ibbotson, Denise CLA are in Ottawa. Denise, what was your reaction to what André Pratte had to say?
So here's the thing. He apologized, and it was in that category of apologies that we see so very often, the ifs and if anyone was offended. And look, let's be very, very clear. The word, regardless of the context within which it is uttered, is offensive. And we think about racial slurs that apply to our Jewish friends. We think about racial slurs around French Canadians. In no way, shape, or form is it acceptable to use it even as if you are trying to explain why it's wrong. I'll give you this quick example. It's like the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, getting in the car drunk and getting into an accident and saying, oh, look, here's an example of why you shouldn't drive while drunk. It doesn't make sense. Now, he offered an apology, and the contextual piece is important for folks to understand. But these, and he's a journalist, a 35-year career journalist, these are hurtful words. Words have consequences. Well-intentions, maybe, but this is now in the Hansard of our Canadian. So a young woman or man from the Black community reading that is saying, okay, so this is acceptable language from our Canadian political institutions. Very difficult.
John, what do you think?
Well, there's no excuse for it. I mean, I know André Pratte well. We have written stories together, as a matter of fact, joint Globe and Mail, La Presse stories. I know what he was trying to say. He was trying to say that there are things that you cannot say, and this is one of the things you cannot say. But the fact is, you cannot say it, André, and you should have known that. Race is, interestingly, even more powerful than sexuality in this. We had Kevin Pillar, a Blue Jays player, has been suspended for several games and apologized profusely for using a homophobic slur that starts with F during the heat of the game. Several news outlets actually wrote the word down. It said he said this word, but no one has written the N-word down. They just refer to it as the N-word. So and André should have known that racial sensitivities are so incredibly powerful and potent in North America that there is no context in which that word can be uttered.
Yes, there is. Rap culture.
Yes, and then we move into, all right, you take that, Susan, because I'm not going there.
Go ahead, Susan.
No, I'm just saying that, you know, rappers use that word all the time. They've reappropriated the word, I guess, but that we're not talking about rappers right now. We're talking about a Canadian senator. And I take Denise's point. On the other hand, there is a difference between using it in an illustrative way, however, hurtfully. I'm sure he didn't intend that. And hurling a slur at another player, as we've seen in two separate instances, for example, in hockey and baseball recently.
Yeah, so
in both cases, those players were fined appropriately, and they were, so I'm glad people are taking it seriously.
Yeah, you're talking about Ryan Getzlaff, who apologized. He made a homophobic slur.
Ducks.
Yeah, of the Anaheim Ducks, and he was fined $10,000. And of course, to John's point, that the other athlete you're talking about, yes, had been suspended from games. But Denise, you're about to make a point?
Yeah, so here's what we've taken it now to the sports and arts and culture, and my point was really that this is in one of the highest political institutions, that this is now in the Hansard, that this is a word that somehow, even as you're trying to make the point, and look, I accept his apology that he realized that, but that it wasn't appropriate. But in the same way that you cannot utter the slur, the racial epithet that describes Jewish folks or Muslim folks, that somehow this is not the time to make an example. What you need to say, and I think I would, and many folks have said to me, if we had a chance to talk with Senator Pratte, is, what does this then say to young, white, black, teenagers in our high schools who are looking at this and saying, okay, so, well, if the senators can use it, well, hell, why don't we? And they would not have the context that we have. Okay. That is a demonstration of what not to say, but you don't have the liberty of nuancing, especially when you have this stage.
But it does make a difference that surely he was making the point, however wrongly, that, surely intentions do matter. He wasn't attacking someone. He was trying to make a higher point. There must be some difference for that.
And that's what's saving him. If there were a tape of any senator, André would never ever say it, but if there were a tape of a senator in casual conversation, not aware that the mic was hot, using that word to describe African Americans or any people of color, that senator would be gone from the Senate. That would be the end of their career. André Pratte will survive this because he was trying to make a point about the importance of using of language and the sensitivity in language. That's why he's going to escape from this without having his career destroyed. But it doesn't matter. He said it, and he's in a whole lot of trouble for it.
Yeah. I will just bookend it by saying this, that clear across the country, there's so many grassroots organizations that are investing resources and time and energy to eradicating the use of that word, and to see it in our national institution, however well-intentioned, is problematic. And look, refer to it as what it is, a racial slur, and don't use that word. It's hurtful to make a point.
Denise, let me pick up on something Susan said earlier, except in rap culture, and I'll tell you a little story to illustrate this. My very young niece at the time was singing Gold Digger by Kanye West around the house, and she was saying the N-word, singing it loud and proud, and we had to sit her down and have a conversation that it wasn't acceptable. It was kind of confusing to her. She accepted it in the end, and through a lot of talking, she knew what she was saying. But what about the idea that it is so prevalent in music, which is, I would say, more influential on our youth in this country than the Senate?
Yeah.
So this is, Carol, we are about to unpack a whole bunch of stuff about the use of that word in popular culture. But here's what I can tell you is that from my perspective, looking at our political institutions, I'm going to leave the rappers alone, because quite frankly, they're not the ones that make policy or impact the lives of everyday Canadians, and aren't the ones who are helping to inform our curriculum. And I'm thinking about the teachers who are looking at this and sort of saying, well, how do I teach a respect for other cultures? So I would want to have a conversation on another Sunday Scrum about the use of that word in rap culture, but not in this context at all. It doesn't make sense to me.
The fact that they are not making policy, fair enough as a point. John. I mean,
I find myself befuddled by the incredible power of language these days. Last week, We talked briefly about a column that had appeared in a magazine about cultural appropriation, in which the author of the column said he didn't believe in cultural appropriation. Since we had that conversation, two people have resigned, including Jonathan Kay of Walrus Magazine, and Steve Laterani of CBC has been seriously demoted by the looks of it, all because they wrote funny tweets in support of that author. And now we're talking about a senator who's in deep, deep trouble for, in an effort to be sympathetic, using the N-word in a way that was nonetheless completely out of context and offensive. We are living in a walking on eggshells world. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. We are teaching that even sports players are not allowed to swear on the field or insult other people on the field. But it is a world in which one has to be so incredibly careful about what one says.
And one's hope is that it's not, it doesn't inspire fear. Like it doesn't drive all the prejudice and the ignorance underground, and you get a lot of people sort of walking around resentful and muttering. You hope instead that it opens people's minds to how hurtful language can be to other people. You hope that.
Well,
probably a little of both.
What is more dangerous, though, being so afraid of making a mistake you keep your thoughts to yourself for fear of reprisal, or feeling comfortable enough to contribute to a debate with your ideas?
I've always been of the opinion that let the hatred flow. Let people see what you really think. Don't cover it up with euphemism or careful evasions. But I'm white, and I'm not likely to be the victim of most of these slurs. So I probably have a different perspective on that.
Well, as a woman, you would get some of them. But
yeah.
Denise?
I would say that free speech is important. Free speech. So we don't want, folks who have a particular view on something. Let's hear it. Let's hear what your position is, and then we can have a conversation around the issues. But then let's also recognize that there are some things that are very hurtful. As I mentioned, words have consequences, and not just because they're uttered, but because it comes from a history, right? And look, we know that when we talk about the Holocaust, and we talk about the internment of Japanese Canadians, the Chinese head tax. There's a context there that folks need to understand. But absolutely, let's have this conversation and let's open it up to make sure that we understand where everybody is coming from. But in this case, I don't get the use of that word in any way, shape, or form.
I'm so happy to have had all of these conversations we've had today with all of you. Freelance columnist Susan Riley, John Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail, and Denise CLA of SEM Group Public Affairs. Thank you for your fearlessness in taking all of these topics on. I'll talk to you next week.